So here's a little breaking news that'll surely snatch your britches. I do actually know that this movie exists, which I honestly wouldn't blame you for not believing, considering that I currently have the posting consistency of a crunchy grape. Like, it was good, you enjoyed it. You just don't know when you're going to get the next one, but it's probably going to take a disappointing amount of time. All right, so quick rewind. About 6 months ago, Paramount released their first ever trailer and look into their new big budget Transformers animated movie. After that, I went online and made a YouTube post that was my first and turned out to be the only post I ever made even addressing the movie. And yeah, there is a reason for that. I've been super busy working on this project that's going to be coming out really soon, so make sure you subscribe for that. Can't wait for you guys to see it. But more importantly, that trailer, man, it looked really bad.
Guys, that's not good.
In that YouTube community post that I made after the trailer dropped, I was mainly just ranting about how bad the trailer looked.
Gonna cry?
And the question is whether any of that ended up being true for me, because I would have legit taken a gun to my head, betting on my life that there was no possible way you could derive even a halfway decent movie from one of the cringiest, worst trailers made in Transformers in history, period. It's one of the... I hate that trailer. And I guess in this overly aggressive analogy that I, for some reason, made, I would have... Yeah, I would have been shot. We're here to talk about how good this movie is. Guys, I cannot express or emphasize how shocked I am that this movie is not complete brain rot, let alone actually decent, let alone good. That being said, it's not perfect, and I do want to talk a little bit later on about some of the not insignificant flaws that are important to admit. So I'm not going to do a whole plot recap. You already know what it is. Optimus Prime, Megatron origin story, how they went from friends to enemies, etc. Some of the first few minutes, what really kind of caught me off guard is how decent the music is. I didn't expect that. We saw that the composer was, I think, Brian Tyler, who's made some really, really mediocre music. And it did something with the music that I felt kind of odd that Transformers hasn't done in a long time, which is that it actually committed to the idea that these are robots, that it's Cybertron, with kind of the electronic techno that makes sense, that works. Also, one of the things that I did originally compliment in the community post talking about the trailer was that the animation for what it was looked surprisingly good. I stand by that. They did a fantastic job with the budget and with the style that they committed to. The transformations are really fluent. They're not too bouncy, but they're also not too like aggressive or harsh or mechanical. They did a good job making it feel like it's organic life. And don't get me wrong, this would have absolutely still been 10 times cooler if they just committed to that like Puss in Boots Spider-Verse animation. Considering that they chose this format, this more typical 3D rendering, I am really impressed with what they did with it. There's also just some creative choices that I thought were really cool. The evolving rocks was sweet. We all remember the like red light smearing around when Megatron became Megatron at the very end. It feels like the first time we've had a real creative team in Transformers in a while. It feels really good to, for once, actually watch a Transformers movie and instead of constantly saying, I wish they would have done this or I would have done this, instead to say, I would have never thought to do this. And here's the thing, I'm a live action guy. That's straight up just the way that I am. I will always prefer live action. But one of the really great things about having this in animated form was the Easter eggs, the potential. And they're able to sprinkle those everywhere throughout here. You could pause during half the frames in this movie and probably spot some sort of Easter egg to the G1 continuity. And it's a lot of fun. Now, in terms of something that I was not expecting, it's the humor. Yeah, okay. Fellas, it was so bad in the trailer. If there's anything I would have bet my life on, cold hard stop, that there was no way it was going to be redeemable, it was the humor, because there was zero reason to believe that it wouldn't be. But here's the kicker. The humor, it had some rough spots. It wasn't perfect, but in general, even some of the worst moments in the trailers were not nearly as bad in the movie. Instead, there would be like a little twist in the movie that would make the entire joke different or add context or make it at least palatable. One of the good examples of this is in the trailer. There's that shot that they used a bajillion times when they're falling down the cliff trying to learn how to transform. Bumblebee is trying to pop out his wheels. They clipped out the part where his arms eject and start like paddling on the ground. That's actually pretty funny, and they left that out of the trailers, and my wife and I both got a chuckle. And there's multiple instances of that throughout the entire movie, with one exception of this joke that they just ran into the ground, and it's not a surprise to anybody. If you've seen the trailers, you've seen the joke 15 times. And the weird thing about it is going to make it a little bit awkward for families and for parents to bring their really young children, because it takes the curse word count from 0 or like 1 to like 7. For a joke it's not even funny, and it just gets less funny every time that they redo it. It's exhausting. Back to what I was saying, one of the things that really pleasantly surprised me with this movie is the amount of nuance it had, especially for an animated movie that have just been losing the art of that over the last few years. One of those comes back to Bumblebee. I was really surprised at how restrained he was, how many times they didn't have him make a joke, and I expected him to throw out some useless quip that was going to ruin the serious moment, and they didn't, and I really appreciate that. I don't like comedies that are disguised as action superhero movies. And while it was definitely a comedy and had a lot of humor, and probably still more than I'd prefer. I was surprised that it didn't destroy the film and ruin the watching experience. Oh, and another kind of random side note that I appreciate is they didn't give Bumblebee or B-127 his official name by the end of the movie. It's like, hey, kids, just so you, in case you didn't know, this is Bumblebee. I appreciate that they followed the continuity of him not adopting that name. Now, okay, I've got to be cautious here. There's a couple things that are a bit of a double-edged sword, where on one side of that coin, it's one of the better parts, one of the better aspects of the movie, but then on the flip side is actually one of the bigger problems, the things I didn't like so much about it. One of them is voice acting. Real quick though, I'm genuinely so excited to talk about this video sponsor, Setapp. And hold on, you gotta hear me out because I used their Mac and their iPhone apps long before I was doing YouTube full time. Setapp is basically a one-stop shop subscription platform for every type of productivity app you can possibly imagine. Their apps have saved me countless hours over the course of my video editing career. For example, one of my all-time favorites is called One Switch. It's just a button that chills on my MacBook menu bar and gives me quick access to a ton of functions I'd normally have to dig into settings for or that I just couldn't control at all. You can assign keyboard shortcuts to any of these functions, which I did years ago, and I use all of them daily, like breathing. I also just started using the Be Focused app for its checklists and timers that keep me on track while working, and my newest favorite discovery, an app called MindNode, which is now what I use to lay out all of my creative ideas and plans for upcoming videos. These productions can get really elaborate, so using this format over traditional notes is game-changing. Oh, and just as importantly, I have the same app synchronized on my iPhone. You can try Setapp completely free for 2 weeks if you click on the link below and use my code PAPERMELON. And thanks again to Setapp for being awesome enough to sponsor this video. There's some incredible performances in here. One of the obvious ones that everyone talks about being D16, his voice performance, Henry Brycey Tyson, something like that. He did such a good job in subtly changing his voice throughout the movie and evolving into Megatron, and I didn't even realize that there had been a shift until they had that quick flashback scene at the very end when Optimus is looking off in the distance watching Megatron lead with the Decepticons. We hear D16's voice before it was Megatron. I was just like, wow, his voice changed so much. He did an incredible performance. He did a great job. On the flip side of that, hear me out. There's a lot of people getting very defensive about this movie. There's some performances that just don't do it, and one of them is Scarlett Johansson as Alita 1. When the movie starts and we hear her voice, it just catches me off guard because it's the very familiar raspy Scarlett Johansson voice, and it stands out. It's very distracting, and I thought by the end of the movie it would be less so, but it's not. And when you actually look at the character and the personality that Alita 1 has in the movie, I think it would have been way more fitting to cast somebody like Jamie Lee Curtis, who has a much more straightforward and commanding voice. I understand that her and Optimus Prime are supposed to sound approximately the same age because they're probably going to try and take some approach of the love story to it. Then again, any story that tries to approach that angle can go burn in flames. I hate it so much. Josh Cooley, if we could, please don't. I will do anything. Chris Hemsworth, he does a great Orion Pax. I think he's got a good, strong voice that was pleasant to hear throughout the movie and good as a main character cast. But by the end of the movie, I was really surprised at how forced his voice was. Like, it sounded like a kid trying to make their voice deep. It had turned into like a parody of Peter Cullen.
Freedom and autonomy are the rights of all sentient beings.
We are autonomous robotic organisms from the planet Cybertron.
All are truly Autobots.
The great Sentinel Prime, the technology's inventor.
It's not so much of a problem for this movie as it is a concern for the future of the franchise. If they're trying to commit to Chris Hemsworth and this role, I would have preferred him speak closer to his normal voice and just make it very different than the Optimus we know. And that kind of leads me to the other double-edged sword, the designs. One of the most random parts of the movie that I really ended up liking, it was one of my favorite parts, was the appearance from the Quintessons. I really like the designs. Very unique, and they fit in the Transformers universe while also standing out. Anytime that the robots had like a masked face, it looked very cool. And that kind of reminds me, speaking of pleasant surprises, Alpha Trion, insanely cool design. I was not expecting that. By introducing Alpha Trion in the first half of this movie, it immediately showed and proved how cool they could have been if they committed to that style. I guess that leads to the flip side of that coin. The faces. They are horrible. There's something about these designs, the faces in specific, that like pinch a nerve for me. They're very annoying. They were so overly simplistic. They looked very underwhelming and underdesigned. I hate the unified tooth. They look like they'd be from an Earthspark episode or a Doc McStuffins. Black Arachnia. Dude, they gave her the sickest design. And her face, dude, I think the fleshy mouth faces of these characters make these the worst Transformers designs ever made. I really do. Most of the weaknesses from the movie in general kind of just come down to reminding you that this is a family kids cartoon. And it's really just so out of left field where they'll just hit you with one of the worst lines you've ever heard.
Why? For all the power of Cybertron.
What the heck?
Funny enough, when I actually look back on things, a lot of the bad dialogue falls onto Sentinel Prime. One of the real bangers is when Sentinel Prime delivers this evil monologue where he has to unveil all the information conveniently in in one tidbit when he says, "What truth that I plucked the cogs from your newborn chests, forced you to mine so that I could pay off the quintessons and live like a king?" That's really bad. That leads me to one of the biggest issues that I have, but it's not just with this movie. It's a trope that they've been doing for decades now. And this is my venting source, so you guys are going to hear about it. I'm going to lose my mind if we see another movie pull out the whole "we can't kill the main bad guy because that would be the wrong thing to do" trope, while simultaneously we've killed a million of the henchmen because they're not main characters. You know what? Really quick, to all the filmmakers out there, any directors writing stories, let me just ask you this. Why? Why are we still doing that, fellas? When we get to the end and Optimus Prime stops Megatron from killing Sentinel Prime by jumping in front of the blast, I almost yelled at the screen like a 6-year-old. Honestly, I don't even care the approach that you take to the story, whether it's morally bad to kill no matter what, or if it's justified for the right causes. I don't care which angle you take it from, but you cannot have your cake and eat it too. The way that they'll just massacre hundreds of technically way more innocent henchmen following orders, and they'll even do it with quips and jokes just to get to the end where the main hero has like the most heinous evil villain in his grasp, but goes, "You know, killing, it's wrong."
Rebuilding Iacon cannot begin with an execution.
With this guy! I have knife hands!
We're better than this. Don't be like Sentinel.
And they really treated it like whenever D16 was like, "No, I want to kill Sentinel Prime for what he's done. This is horrible." Ryan Pax and everyone was just like, "How could you? We can't do that. Hey, well, why would you ever do that?" This evil tyrant that's ruined entire generations and undoubtedly killed countless and countless of innocent lives. And it's like, yeah, put him in cuffs, fellas. I just didn't like that kicking off point for proving that, hey, D16's turning evil. He wants revenge on the evil tyrant. Can you believe that crap? It might be giving me cancer. I don't know. I'm going to start crying just thinking about it. There's also a pretty aggressive and unnatural switch up in D16 as he transitions over to Megatron. He just kind of turned maniacal, like, "Ah, ha, ha, evil," suddenly. And it was kind of cringy to watch him just suddenly turn around at Optimus and go, "I got this." Wow. All that's to say, I know I just went on like several rants, but it doesn't change the fact that this is such a pleasant surprise as a movie. Now, really quick, I wanted to talk about the box office for this movie, the kind of post-theatrical release success of it, because I think it's such an interesting case study on how a film studio can completely sabotage a movie's success. But I do think that there's a flip side of that people aren't talking about and the fans are really struggling to cope with. With every downturn that this box office has taken throughout the theatrical run of this movie, the mental gymnastics that so many fans have come up with in order to, "Oh no, this is actually a huge success," and you don't understand why this is actually perfectly fine. For example, towards the end of the box office run of this movie just recently, the film was sitting at a global $100 million profit, which is very poor. An entire group of fans took to online declaring that box office analysts were predicting that the movie could make up to $150 to $200 million over the weekend simply because the community kind of forced a trend into being. And I'm not accusing that or saying anything bad about it, but anytime that people like me tried to speak up online, we're very openly mocked for just trying to say, "Hey, it's okay to have hope, but we don't need to be super unrealistic." Turns out it was not a huge success and it didn't influence the box office results. Unfortunately, the same goes for all the reviews that were made for it. A lot of fans were convinced, oh, once they review this, the positive word of mouth will make this a huge success, but when it didn't, then would just move on to the next thing that they had to cope with. Well, this guy hasn't reviewed it yet. Once he does, then it'll be huge. And then he does, it's not huge. Oh, well, surely when this guy reviews it, then it'll blow up. He does, and it doesn't blow up. Well, once it's released in Europe, then it'll be huge. And that was kind of the icing on the cake, was this trend that took off and got this topic very popular on social media. And I still see people saying, this saved the movie, and it didn't save the movie. The box office results are in, and for a budget of $75 million that you, as rule of thumb, double for the marketing budget as well, this movie didn't even break even. So if you happen to be somebody who heard my criticisms, maybe you hear box office stats about the failings of the movie, and your entire natural reaction is to explain them away or try and justify why it's a huge success, take a step back, take a breather. The toxic positivity, it's gotta stop. Ultimately, this movie was the biggest large-scale financial failure in the history of the franchise. Toy sales and merch can help to the overall earnings, but frankly, they can keep making toys that aren't tied to a $75 million budget movie. At least in my area, I saw marketing all over the place. It's just that they leaned so heavily into the horrible, cringy aspects of the movie that were barely even there oftentimes. They turned off the general public from wanting to see it. I am a diehard Transformers fan, and even I heavily considered not even going to watch this movie in theaters. I had to practically drag my wife wife to go watch the movie with me, and she's never not been perfectly fine watching a Transformers with me. I really hope that we see a sequel to this movie for no other reason because the team behind it deserves to keep making these movies. They did such a good job. They clearly have a passion for the craft. But ultimately, Paramount's a company, and it's a company that makes decisions based on the numbers, and even then, they've proven that they barely have the capacity to rub two brain cells together to make a competent decision, even financially.
Jazz has got to be a cool guy, right? How can you have a name like Jazz and not be cool?
That's to say that on all monetary accounts, we shouldn't ever see a sequel to this movie, but if we do, it's not because it was a smash hit or success, it's because of the history of this franchise, and frankly, the fact that this is, I believe, the biggest IP that Paramount owns. This franchise certainly has a history of rewarding some of the lowest common denominator, horrible decision makers, and booting some of the most sincere and passionate minds behind everything. Either way, this may be the last time that we see a Transformers movie in a long time, so sound out in the comments what you thought about this one. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. All right, later, guys. Did you get your popcorn? I know it's a white screen. I told you we're here to record a video. You're in the back. Do you have your popcorn?